Continuing on with our study of the book of Ruth, last week we had a little excursion into providence, into talking about some of the elements of providence, why we believe that there is a providence of God. And then we looked at several questions around thinking about the providence of the Lord. And that really prompted us because we looked at chapter 2, verse 1 of Ruth, where New International Version, now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side from the clan of Elimelech, a man of standing, whose name was Boaz. And Boaz being introduced in chapter 2, verse 1, leads into the fact that now these couples, these individuals' paths are going to cross in the providence of God, which prompted our little excursion into discussion around providence. But beginning in verse 2, we see Ruth, for the first time, beginning to take initiative in her and Naomi's situation. So verse 2, and Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor." Naomi said to her, "Go ahead, my daughter." So she went out and began to glean in the fields behind the harvesters. As it turned out, she found herself working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. So, and we might as well read on verse 4. Just then, Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. "The Lord be with you. The Lord bless you," they called back. So, as I noted, this is the first time that Ruth is seeming to take the initiative. So far, through chapter 1, Naomi was the centerpiece as far as the actions, what was being done, decisions being made. But now in verse 2 of chapter 2, we see Ruth beginning to, step out. She's stepping out to act. And with that, she's going to join in with the hidden hand of God working through providence. But it's interesting to think about this. In verse 2, as Ruth is saying to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up after the leftovers from the harvesters." She evidently was well versed by this time in the knowledge, in the law of Moses, which talked about the provisions for the poor of the land. Leviticus chapter 19, verses 9 and 10, and chapter 23, verses 22 of Leviticus. And then Deuteronomy chapter 24, verses 17 through 22, all three of those passages refer to the same command of the Lord, that for the poor, the destitute, the aliens that were living in your country, that when the owners of the property would glean in their fields, they were not to clear cut it. They were to leave some around the edges, and if you missed something, you were not to go back and get it. And the Lord said, this is for those who are not as fortunate as you who are harvesting the land at this point. Evidently, Naomi had talked about the law's provision because Ruth was a Moabite. She wouldn't naturally have known this, having grown up in a very heathen land. But Naomi had evidently talked about God's provisions for the destitute, and Ruth was stepping up to take God at his word. And her statement, "behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor," may even hint at her belief in God's oversight of her life. Ruth may be beginning at this point to begin to understand that the Lord's hand has been involved in all that has happened in her life thus far. Not clearly stated, but this phrase seems to be a little hint of that. And Naomi, of course, gave her permission to go. Now, the interesting thing about this is, why did Naomi go? I mean, she comes back, and the little town, everybody in Bethlehem are saying, well, here's Naomi. Naomi said, "Don't call me Naomi. Call me Mara. Call me bitter. I went out full and I've come back empty. I don't have nothing. My life is over." Well, if your life was really all that over, why aren't you out there with Ruth gleaning in the fields? I mean, is a question that kind of comes up from this. And what do you think about that? Why didn't...
Well, how old do you think that Naomi is?
Oh, I would just estimate Naomi's probably in her 40s, maybe late 40s. You know, you would have married quite young back then. So if she married at between 15 and 20 and had 2 sons that became of marriage age, maybe 18 to 20 years old. So she would have been about 35. They were in 45, maybe 50 years old. So, and for those that are visiting, if you can't read this, just ask for translation. They're so used to my terrible handwriting. Don't worry about it if you can't read it. Nobody else can in here either, so, you know. But why didn't Naomi go? One, possibly age.
Well, was it because, not just because of her, was it their social structure? I mean, like, you know how they were a lot more structured, so didn't the kids do it? I mean, I'm
too
trying
much
to...
into it, she's lazy.
Well, I'm just trying to give her, if you look back then, she is bitter and lazy, but would it have been done then, is all I don't know.
Brad said she's lazy, so we'll note that.
That's probably
And then, you know,
I don't know.
tradition or culture.
She has just lost her husband and 2 sons.
I started to say depressed.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking,
Very
depression.
depressed.
I don't see that making up for it. You know, the husband, she probably was depressed about his kids. I'm free.
Yeah, free. Yes, sir. Kind of like my daddy said, sitting on the streets in Chatham, Virginia, sitting in his car, and he overheard 2 ladies talking. And he told me this, goodness, 40 years ago longer. Said 2 ladies met on the street. One of them said, "So I'm sorry to hear about your misfortune." And said the other lady said, "What misfortune?" Said, "Your husband died." She said, "Oh, honey, that was his misfortune." So it kind of went right along with that. That was his misfortune. I don't think she grieved a whole lot about that one passing. So why didn't Naomi go? Maybe age. Brad notes she was lazy. Totally legit. Tradition, culture. She may have been depressed. Because remember, as we talked about in chapter 1, she was a wounded believer. She was, we would say, depressed. She felt like the Lord had worked against her. Nothing that she was expecting to turn out in her life had turned out. So maybe it was still a lag over. Go ahead and go. Yeah, God's made a provision for us, but He ain't done nothing for me so far, so why should He do anything for me now? You want to go, Ruth, go ahead. You have my blessing, but...
I might be just a little push. A year ago.
Yeah. Yeah, she could have been, it could have been, it could have been slick to get her to go. To get Ruth to go. We starving. You gonna do anything about it? You know. And it could have been some of the, along with that, and you could tie that into culture. It could be, we don't know, it's not stated, but it could be that Naomi, seeing how Ruth was from another country, wanted people to think she was more her servant rather than her daughter-in-law. So we could put vanity there. That, yeah, I've got it bad, and I'm going to send my servant daughter-in-law out to do for me. Any number of these could be elements of why she didn't go, but I just think it's really interesting that Ruth is going out, she's stepping out, and Naomi's sitting at home.
Hey, I don't buy that vanity one.
Okay? And why not?
Because her daughter-in-law had done so much for her and not deserted her. And then she says in that next sentence, "Go ahead, my daughter." I think she viewed her as a daughter. I mean, I don't think she.
Yeah, and this would,
No,
this
I
would,
don't think she would have done it.
yeah, this would have been more of the vanity before others, if it was there. Like I said, don't know why, but any one of these could have been, or all of these could have played into an element. But indeed, she did call her daughter, so vanity may be one that we want to put a question mark by with that.
Well, in my Bible, it says that when Ruth said it, she was anxious. So it may have been, even though you're supposed to be able to do that, that's kind of one of those things she had, if they actually used the word anxiety. So maybe it's just because Ruth was younger and even she was just more daring to go do it because it was not guaranteed that she could do that.
Yeah, and as we will see as we go on into chapter 2, remember she was a stranger. She was a heathen stranger. She was a recent enemy. Judges 3. So it could also be that Ruth felt some anxiety. She felt a little reluctant. She knew of the law of Moses that allowed for this, but once again, I ain't from him, you know. And my country is known for its worship of idols, and we actually attacked Israel in the recent past. When I say recent past, it could have been anything from just a few years to maybe 20 or 30 years ago, but still, in that world, that's recent. You know, as we still hear some of the Arab countries talk about the Crusades, they were 1,000 years ago. And they are still talking about it. So things don't automatically just get put aside because, you know, we have moved on, you know, in our way of saying things. So any number of these could have come into play with Naomi not going. But Ruth is showing us in her statement and in her asking an avenue of joining with God's hidden hand of providence. She's stepping out to act. Not for just herself, but for Naomi. And as we noted about providence last week, providence isn't just fatalistic. Well, if God is almighty, and if God is all-knowing, and if God has predestinated things, why have I got to do anything? Ruth gives us the counterbalance to that, to those statements. Yes, those things are true about God, but God expects us. We have an obligation to act based upon what we believe in the Lord. God will provide us opportunities, but we are to move. We are to act to get into the flow of God's providence. So as Ruth, even for whatever reason, Naomi didn't go, Ruth began to step up so that she could step into the providence of God. Handling difficult situations that we encounter in life opens to us opportunities to experience God's providences for us. And this is an action term. Okay, Lord, I believe you're going to do something for me. I'm just going to sit right here and wait for you to do something for me. Anytime today would be good. And Ruth could have done that. Naomi may have been doing that. But Ruth saw joining with God and her knowledge of God's word as an action term. I need to step out. I need to get up and get doing. And when I do that, unbeknown to her, she was stepping into the providential working of the Lord. So, as we consciously move in light of whatever situation we may find ourselves, and that could have been, illness, it could be financially related, it could be any number of things. When we consciously begin to move into act, at that point we begin to unconsciously, because I don't think Ruth said, okay, I'm going to see the providence of God. She probably didn't know enough to even be able to say that. But as she consciously began to step out and to find a field, let me find a field in the person's eyes whom I find favor, so I can get us some food. As she did this, she began to unconsciously step in to the providence of God and put herself at the disposal of God. And as verse 3 says, as she went out to find a place to gather free food, or welfare as we would call it today, as it turned out, NIV, she found herself working in a field belonging to Boaz. As it turned out, that's a providential phrase. It's all, as you go back to the Hebrew, it's like, as chance would chance have, would be a literal translation of that. As chance would chance have. We would say, what are the odds of that? Or who would have thunk that she would have found the field belonging to Boaz? What luck that is. But it's not luck. It was God's providence. That she found herself, verse 3, so she went out and began to glean in the fields behind the harvesters, and Naomi, it's not recorded, ever told her where to go. As we'll see later on in chapter 2, Naomi was quite surprised. But you would have wondered, why should you have been surprised, Naomi? You knew Boaz was a relative. As soon as Ruth said it, she said, oh yeah. And that's a discussion we'll have a little bit later on. But Ruth stepped up. And as she stepped up, she stepped into the providence of God. And sometimes things that we just blow over as being just the luck of the draw. I got the short stick or I got the long stick. And ever how you want to define that. Sometimes God's providences are so subtle that we just tend to miss it. Comments, questions on that before we move on? In verse 4, we're really introduced to Boaz for the first time in the book. Now, he's been mentioned in verse 1, but now we're introduced to him. Verse 4, just then, another providential phrase. Just then, Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. The Lord be with you. The Lord bless you, they called back. And Boaz is now, based upon the wording of our text, he's walking unconsciously. I don't have any idea that Boaz, when he arrived in Bethlehem, was expecting to find Ruth in his field. We don't have any indication of that from the passage. So he is unconsciously moving in the providence of God as well. Providence is never one-sided. Ruth has now probably been working in his field maybe up to nearly a half a day by the time he comes on the scene. And it's interesting that we are giving this little insight into the character of this man Boaz. Now, we've already been told that he's a man of standing. In other words, he's a respected member of the Bethlehemite community. But we're given a little more insight into his character, and this comes really from his field hands, his servants. And it seems that Boaz followed the Lord's command through Moses in the treatment of his servants or his slaves. People who sold themselves to another or who had been brought into Israel from the outside. And remember, we talked about this at length when we went through our study of Philemon, that in Israel, servitude or slavery, both of the same words, just different ways of translating the word, was, however, never to be in the context of race or class superiority. Leviticus chapter 25, verse 42 makes that very clear. And that the contract of service was built on the need of one to eat, to have survival, or for security, or for the other to have hands to work in a pre-industrial agrarian society. Leviticus 25, verse 35, 39, and 40, and Exodus chapter 21, verses 7 through 10, really talks about the contract and how the Israelites were to have servants. It was a contracted thing, never a race of superiority, never forever. And this service that they contracted for, and I'm just really giving you the thumbnail of what we talked about at length in Philemon, was in exchange for support. It was a safety net for those of Israel who were not as successful as their brethren. And this is stated very clearly in Deuteronomy chapter 15, verses 4 and verses 7 through 11. Servitude, slavery. Folks, told you. You see what's coming? He's been keeping the chair warm for you. That's what he's been doing. Because I told him he was taking his life in his hands, taking your chair at the bistro table there.
She's
That's right.
stretching legs today. And Julie's been here for like 10 minutes.
I'd rub that in if I was you, bro.
Julie's got a good seat, too.
Yeah, got a good seat. Got a comfortable seat. She can go ahead and take a nap while I'm up there boring everybody. You know. Slavery or servitude was tightly regulated. Exodus chapter 21. And the only time that a person would stay a slave forever in Israel was if they wanted to be voluntarily. And that was Deuteronomy chapter 15, verses 12 through 18, talks about that voluntary servitude. But servitude in Israel was never a racial or a capitalist thing. It was a spiritual thing. It was a means of testimony. So that's kind of where we looked at it. And it's interesting that Boaz evidently followed these commands, these regulations about servitude and how you handled your servants. Because the relationship that Boaz had with his workers, his servants, or his slaves, any one of the three terms, is set in the very greetings held between them. Now, why am I spending all this time on this? Talking about servitude, his relationship to his servants. Why would that be important? Other than, Billy, you're trying to fill up the time you have for your Sunday school class, you know. Why spend time talking about Boaz and his servants and character?
It shows what kind of person you are.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's it. That you can best tell the nature of a person by their relationship to their property, their money, and those with whom they come into contact in getting that property and that money. And it's clear from the salutation and statements made that follow this up in the remainder of this chapter that there was a mutual respect based upon a relationship with God between Boaz and those who served him. Huge. And I think it's interesting as we look at this. He's a man of standing. He comes to the field where his servants are. The Lord bless you is the first thing out of his mouth. Not, okay, how many acres have you covered today? Have you really, are you being careful in harvesting this? Now, I need to make sure, because we've got those people on Wall Street they're going to make that financial analysis about our company next year. We've got to show a profit. First thing out of his mouth, the Lord bless you. What? They answer back, and the Lord be with you too. Bless you. I mean, in that phrase, there's a statement that gives us an indication about the character of Boaz. And this is another element of stepping up, to step into God's providence. Being faithful in the common, ordinary things, the responsibilities of life, places us at times in a position to be a blessing to another who is being used of God. All of this, I say, he's a man of standing. got a character that is shown in relationship to his servants. And Boaz, through these two things, is in a position, providentially, to be a blessing to one that is in need. And this echoes something we've covered before. Colossians chapter 3, verse 17. Paul said, whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him.
Billy, I do think that the way Boaz treated his servants is a very valid reflection of his character. When you think about it around his situations today, you see people that, you treat people nice when either you have to because they have authority over you, or you need something from them.
Yeah.
But how do you treat those people that you don't need anything from, or they
Yeah.
have no?
There you go. Yeah. Yeah, when you think about servants, Boaz is the boss. He's the owner. He is the harvester. He's the man. And it's how you relate to people whom you don't have to be nice to that tells a lot about who we really are. And that's an uncomfortable thing for us to think about in our world today, because we are so driven by the fact of you are only useful to me because of what I can get out of you. And that's driven by a number of forces. And we get caught up in that. We live in that. But the presence and the power of God in our lives is often gauged in that relationship. You're a person of standing. How do you relate to people that it really doesn't make a difference if you're not nice to them or not, or if you're nice to them or not? They're little people. They're meaningless. They're nobodies. How do we handle that relationship? That tells us a lot about who we are.
Well, he was the boss, but he was also teaching about the Lord, and that's what he said to him.
Yeah.
And the Lord be with you.
Yeah.
So he was showing them how he lived and how they all said things.
Yeah, yeah.
Pointing to the right direction.
That's right. Yeah, and that goes right back to I think the ultimate purpose of servanthood in Israel was that it should always be a testimony about God and God's provision and God's care for his people, even through using other people. And I think indeed that makes that last part of that circle, that God's place and power in Boaz's life. He was a man of standing. How did he treat those who were beneath him? Showed his character. His character was, I'm going to tell them and show them what a relationship with God is really like. Other points on this, other thoughts on this. Indeed, Boaz influenced his servants, and he's now in a providential place to help someone that, unknown to him, was to be.
And just when we're talking about service,
There you go, brother.
I think we got a stigma on the name servant.
Look out in the cold.
Tell me a little more about that.
Well, I mean, we're all servants.
Yeah.
An employee. Would an employee form, would you take offense if all servants come to the front of the store? Would somebody, you know what I mean? I think it's just a big stigma on that word.
Yeah, very much so.
It implies that I own, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it implies that you are so
worth
far,
less than-
you're worth less.
Yeah.
Which goes back to that idea that if you're showing that type of person whom society is deeming as worth less,
Because if you want to, you're a servant to your customer.
yeah.
Well, he was a servant to God.
How much-
Yeah, and Paul brings that out in Colossians 4 when he talks about servants or slaves being obedient to their masters. He starts off in chapter 4, he says, and remember, masters, you have a master, which follows right in that point. So, Boaz was recognized, and I think this is why we're spending the time on it, because as a man of standing, yeah, people are going to respect him because he's got money. Hey, how are you? But to those of us that work for the man, walk right by, don't even see. Keep on going.
Well, and a weird example that I'm having trouble with in our life is, when you talk about character and the way you treat people, I'm having a really hard time with my child that's in middle school. Now, he's a great child.
Middle schoolers are always hard to deal with.
But you know what he's learning, and Reed's my good child that cares about people and won't hurt your feelings. But even Reed, I have noticed that in middle school there is a very big ranking of kids, and this first time I really noticed it started. And they rank kids on their group, their standing, their wealth, and
The clothes you wear, how you wear them, all that.
The shoes you wear.
Shoes you wear.
Boys are so into shoes. It's unreal. $180 shoes. But what bothers me, and these are all good Christian kids, but it's like they're being reeled in. And Reed actually made the sentence coming home, and I came unglued. And I don't know if he meant it, but he said, oh, something like, that person doesn't matter. And I'm just like, did my child just say that? I'm about to just go insane and have one of my moments, and but I'm just like,
Dale's looking like, oh yeah. Bless you, brother.
I did, because those kind of things really bothered me more so than you getting in trouble for something.
Nothing's changed, it's like that when we was growing up, but you know what Dad did? He went to Pick and Pay and got you the reverse stripe. And you got used to wearing them cheap shoes.
Right.
That's just the way it worked.
But they do, and I'm just so hurt because you do, and I'm like, no, but it's just, I don't know what to do about it. But they rank and they know everything about these kids and what they live, what they do, what their parents do. And I'm just like, I just didn't remember. And what really bothered me is like the good, it's so prevalent. But if they don't do that, then they get put in this group or something.
Yeah.
It's nothing new. It started when, I would say, when I was in elementary school, sixth grade actually, because I was put in even though I was a Christian kid, and also put in where, I stated, well, I had friends, but I choose not to go with the crowd because I was like, well, if I did do this, and if they did something wrong, it would get back to mom and dad, because a lot of them knew them, but it's just like, and if you didn't go by that crowd, and a lot of them were my good friends and stuff, they'll, I was picked on, it was more or less bullying type thing, and especially if you were smart or something like that, you were, and it was just like, especially I had one girl that, because I had some friends, even in middle school, because a new girl come in sixth grade, I went to mom, I said, I don't know what to do about this. I said, I don't even know this girl, she's a new girl, but because of her being a new girl, she got to a couple of my friends, and they, for a couple of weeks, tormented me. And mom's like, well, we're going to your teacher and everything, it was at the time it was Miss Pace, and she said, she's actually, she was actually, by them doing that, I didn't even want to go back to school because I was like, and mom was like, I know something's wrong because she loves school. And but she was so big influence because she didn't want to be going to a new school. She influenced some of the other ones I had friends and, tormented some of the rest of us.
And you bring up a point that we are experiencing in our society. And we hear a lot about bullying, we hear all about this stuff. And it is a part of carnal nature. And we can have all the bullying programs we want. It is a part of carnal nature to put myself up above somebody else.
What's it gonna happen in school when you get out of school and go to work?
Yeah,
You're gonna learn to work.
it is a
If you
part
come out
of life.
school,
It really
you don't
is.
get used to it. When you get out in the real world, you're gonna be better.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, we can try to, mask it all we want to, but it is a part of life. And I think in particular, it seems that middle school, I'm giving you my opinion on this. Okay. I can't go back and say there's research that says, I can't do that. But my opinion is that it seems that in the life of a kid, from birth to, depending upon the kid, 11, 12 years of age, what parents have to say is really powerful, influential. They accept it. They just go with it. But beginning around this age, and that's not set, it could have some variance, a child begins to develop their own sense of self and independence, beginning around that age. Girls begin their periods, so they begin to mature. Physically, boys are beginning to go through the change as well, and all this. And there's the clash of all the hormones, as well as the expectations that comes with a person beginning to move into that age of adulthood, which we call them teenage years, which is a result of what had happened since the beginning of the 19th century. Before then, you were a man. You got out and worked. You may have been married at 16, 17 years of age. Or you were working. You were going. You went from childhood to adulthood. We've just developed...
Stop throwing rocks at girls.
Sir?
That's when you stop throwing rocks at
That's
girls.
when you stop throwing rocks at them and say, hey, you stop throwing it. Yeah.
I've never noticed those before.
Yeah. That's true. I mean, that's what happened. And if you haven't noticed, we can go from dead serious to totally idiots in a second. It's all right. It's just the nature of our
I
class.
remember that. I remember 11 because
But it's right in. And they don't grow. They grow them now like they didn't grow them back when I was a kid. I look at 11, 12-year-old girls. I'm thinking, I never saw anybody like that until I was in high school, man. Of course, I was.
Oh, when you're 30 in high school.
Yeah. That's another story. But along this time, when you run into all of this and that sense of independence, then people begin to define their independence, define who they are by that carnal, C-A-R, carnal, which is self-serving. And part of that self-serving is, my parents make more money than you. I'm better than you. You don't wear the same brand of clothes I wear. You don't wear the same shoes I wear. You can't participate in athletics like I can. You can't this, you can't that, I can. And the people who can with me, we are better than the rest of you people. And it can be displayed either in bullying behaviors, it can be displayed in ostracizing, just ignoring, it can be displayed in any number of ways. The result is still that it hurts when it happens like that. And I think for us as parents and as grandparents, it becomes even more important when kids hit this mid-school age, 12 to 15, really more on this side, that we have to re-emphasize all that we thought we had embedded in our children of knowledge of God, a relationship with Jesus Christ, and what it means to relate to other people. I think we have to do that because there's so many things that pull at this point in some cultures in our area. I worked with some kids from other cultures when I was doing school social work. Never had a problem out of them in elementary school. Never. Middle school, when they began to have the division from their adult parents, is when the gangs came looking for them, because they knew that age and middle school was the time that separation began to take place between home and you moving into adulthood. Now, you want to be a real man? You join us.
Can I say something that a lot of that is the parenting?
Oh, yeah.
A lot of the kids in middle school that you hear what they say is coming from what they hear from their parents or adults, because there's a lot of parents out there that teach their children that class.
That same thing.
And that's where you have to just reiterate with your child your beliefs and how you want them to grow up as a with good character. I mean, we deal with that every day as parents.
Every day. And it's true. They've heard it. Kids don't just make up some of this stuff. They've heard it. They've learned it. We have all the media outlets now that kids have access to. All of the influences that they have, all the activities that they're involved in, all of these things that puts them in an environment where they hear all of this stuff. And what sounds cool and looks good to them, they begin to internalize that. And that battle between the carnal man, even as a Christian, that battle between the carnal man and the spiritual explodes. And kids that we have known that were good Christian kids hit that area, and all of a sudden you wonder, well, were they ever saved? Because I don't know who this kid is coming in the door now. And a lot of it has parental influence. We cannot deny that.
Well, it's parental influence as opposed to peer pressure and outside world influence. They sort of become who they're going to be at that age.
Yeah, they do.
Due to the peer pressure, what their parents have done, their just general life experiences pretty much make you who you are. The only difference that can be made is with God.
Yeah.
That's the only
Now, some of it's God's plan, because there's some crazy stuff that me and Pope went to school with. The ones that shoot out the worst and drunk the most and did the worst things, they end up being preachers. But they're good preachers now. They don't drink anymore. They had to go through it to tell you what not to do and what to do. And some of it's just God's plan.
And that goes back to providence. That sometimes we wonder, how on earth is God going to get person A over here to where they act like they have at least some sense? And as we talked about, the path goes sometimes like this, and you wonder, how on earth did they ever reach here?
How did they survive?
How did they survive, you know? I keep thinking back about times in my own life. Give you a little bit of that.
Hey, watch this.
Yeah, hey, y'all, watch this, you know. And I can remember, sitting under the bleachers up in Virginia in January outside, bleachers outside on the football field, because I couldn't be inside watching them play basketball because I was half lit. And sitting under the bleachers with a big bottle of wine all by myself, nobody around me. And I'm as happy as I could be. Cold as dickens out there. Got me a bottle. I'm good, y'all. I'm happy.
Why were you under
And it's nothing but the providence, nothing but the providence of God that came into play that prevented me from being either dead already or being in a place and a state that is as good as death, as far as my ability to be of any work or value to society. And it was nothing but the providence, and the path has been almost like this too, But providence is there. So, but I think, going back to the question, it's at this age where that carnal battle really begins to explode. And all of the influences that the kids have had through this time takes on a whole different character, a whole different power influence, and they do begin to separate. They begin to become the person that they're going to be when they grow up.
But you've got to trust what you taught them.
You have to.
You can't make them do right or wrong, they're gonna make a decision, right or wrong.
Mhm.
You got to
And
trust
some of
what
that
you taught them.
is good, because, I mean, you talk about becoming a Christian. My children are not Christian because I'm Christian, they're not Christian because I
Right.
wanted them to be Christian. At some point, it has to be
Yeah.
their decision, and it's only when they can separate from,
Mhm.
okay, this is what, and own who they are and what they believe as people. It's rough.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, it is.
hard, yeah.
Yeah.
But it has to happen.
It has to. Because a lot up until this point, you know, kids go to church. Why? Because we make them get out of bed and get clothes on and go. Kids are involved in things because all their friends go to church. And mom and dad make me get up and go to church. But beginning here, the pushback becomes a little more. You know, I don't want to go. They don't have anything fun for me at church. They're all this type of stuff. And what that is saying is that this carnal battle is beginning to explode. And the things that they have either had suppressed, repressed, redirected, exampled, all of these things in every what category you want to put them. All these things that have been influencing all of a sudden hit that wall of beginning separation. And it is. It can be just downright scary. And for some kids, they make that decision.
3/4 of them ain't saved. 3/4 of them don't go to church.
Mhm.
So our kids
Oh, yeah.
have got the upper hand. At least they've been through church, they're saved. The other ones are doing battle without Jesus.
Oh yeah, and they are, and our kids are surrounded by people that are not in the battle. This is life right here. Carnal is life. Self-serving is life. There isn't a battle because they're not even saved. They're, you know, like I said, they're serving themselves.
Me, party one.
Yeah.
And I do think it makes a difference because Reed, he knew the minute he said that what he did wrong. He was embarrassed. But just what scares me is that he, like, maybe 1/4 of the kids are good, not good, but you know, and 3/4 aren't. And I just realized then, I'm just really seeing what peer pressure he is around at middle school. And that's the first time I really noticed it. And Reed's the kind, he'll know it, he won't do wrong, but he'll listen to he won't do anything about it.
Yeah.
I've noticed a lot of things coming out from middle school lately.
Well, we can pick this up again because I've already kept it to 20 minutes after 10, so they'll be done. Cut my salary again up here. Thank you all. Grab something, eat something, drink, eat it during church, make everybody mad. You know, thank you for being here. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for your comments. Make sure our Ortiz family knows that you appreciate being here today.